Good morning, everyone. Welcome along to our October webinar, How to Strengthen Your Relationships at Work. My name is Grahame. If you haven't had the pleasure of joining me in a webinar today, very excited about being home and being able to run this one and work through the content with you today. As always, if you have questions as we're going along, please feel free to either use audio, so unmute yourself on whatever device you're connected with. Alternatively, if you prefer, you can just use the chat function in Zoom, and I'll make sure that I keep an eye on the chat box and respond to your questions as we're going through. I'm mindful of time, so let's get started and talk about how to strengthen your relationships at work. So some of the things we're going to cover today start with talking about why strong work relationships are actually so important for us at work. We're also going to talk about some of the things that you can do to strengthen your relationships, and then we'll cover 4 simple tools that you can use that you can apply at work that will help you improve strength or connection with others in the workplace. And as we often like to do, just a quick quote from Jack Ma, the founder of Alibaba. The world needs new leadership, but the new leadership is about working together. And there's a real theme throughout this webinar today of the importance of finding opportunities to collaborate, to work with other people. It's no longer about competition, it is very much about collaboration. Now, before we dive into the content, I actually would love to start with a question. And I'd love to hear from some of you, what is great about your current work relationships? What do you enjoy about the people that you're working with? Again, feel free to unmute yourself and share something through audio, or if you prefer, use the chat box. I'll keep an eye on that. But I might just go silent for about 30 seconds, give you an opportunity to contribute. Okay, thank you. So let's talk about strong work relationships. Besties. There was a study published by part of a study done by the Gallup organisation last year that found, really interestingly, that having a best friend at work has a massive impact on how well we turn up, on our level of engagement, our level of trust, collaboration, our level of productivity. So interestingly, they found that somebody who has what they would describe as a best friend in their workplace are 7 times, so 700% more likely to be engaged and more likely to be productive whilst they're at work. Even having somebody that you don't necessarily regard as your best friend, but somebody that you do see as a good friend, is also immensely powerful in terms of how more engaged we can be. So again, the theme is all about building friendships, strengthening connections, because the science is showing that when we have those close connections with other people in the place that we work, we're all much more likely to be more engaged. I found that really interesting. At the end of the call today, if you are interested in some more specifics around some of the research that we've been sharing with you, then please feel free to reach out. We'd be happy to share that. But why does this matter? What is so important about strengthening connections? Again, one of the things that we understand about human beings, we are essentially tribal herd creatures. We like belonging, or we belong to part of a tribe. And that's absent from the workplace. And one of the consequences for many of us is that we become less engaged. We don't trust as well. We don't communicate as openly. We're not as collaborative. We're not as productive. And that also can have a ripple effect on others around us. We all generally love and look for interaction with other human beings and friendship. I have talked about Abraham Maslow's hierarchy of needs in some of our other programs. And when Maslow published his theory, his hierarchy was generally described in a pyramid shape, and the theory was that we had to meet the base level need in order to then move up to the next level, and so on until we get to the top level, which was self-actualization. But fundamentally, Maslow's theory was that the base level need for human beings, the one thing or the things that we need first before we can address any other needs, were food, water, clothing, shelter. But there's been some interesting research come up to light in the last 15 or 20 years to suggest that actually underlying all of that is the need for connection. There's a great book called Social, written by Matt Lieberman and his wife, who's a neuroscientist. And in the book, they talk about a number of studies that have shown that we can survive in isolation, but we don't thrive. So in order for a human being to thrive, yes, we need food, clothing, water, shelter, etc., but we also need to feel connected to other human beings. So interaction and friendship, even in a work context, hugely important. And one of the other reasons for building stronger connections is that when we do have that sense of belonging, when we do feel that we are part of a tribe, and we have some sense of friendship with the people that we work with, it makes us feel safe. And one of the fun things about feeling safe is that it automatically makes us more engaged. It also makes us feel more capable because we feel as though we're working with a team who understand us and we, to some extent, understand them. It also helps us feel more valued and fundamentally improves our ability to be creative. We've been doing a lot of work with clients on creative thinking. And one of the things that we found is that when there's a lack of trust and communication within a team, when the team members don't feel safe, don't feel connected, their creativity goes through the floor. But if we flip that around and find opportunities to get to know one another better, to build trust, to build communication, then creativity actually increases. So all of this is hugely important, not just for us as human beings or individuals, but also for our teams. I wanted to share this diagram with you briefly, just again to dig a little deeper into the idea of belonging, the idea of teams, trust, collaboration, and how do we actually get to the point where as a team we perform better than we had in the past? Now, what does a high-performing team look like? So this diagram is from a book called The 5 Dysfunctions of a Team. It was written by Patrick Lencioni, probably one of the top 5 business books of the last 50 years. And Lencioni, again, has taken a tiered, a layered approach, if you like, to the elements or the things that are in their absence make teams dysfunction. And the base level in Lencioni's research is trust. One of the behavioural indicators of a lack of trust in teams is that we don't feel safe enough to be vulnerable. So we all have this air of invulnerability. I won't admit that I don't know the answer to something. I won't ask for help because it might make other people think that I'm incapable or that I'm dumb or I don't work well. I don't want people to think I'm stupid, so I don't put my hand up and ask questions. I don't trust the people around me. So interestingly, trust underlies in Lencioni's model, underlies everything else. If I don't have great relationships with the people around me, it can also be because I don't necessarily trust them. I don't know them that well. If I know somebody well and I have a sense of trust with them, I can be more open with them. I can be more appropriate, open to collaboration, and I can communicate much more with them. So we will come back to Lencioni's model a little later, because one of the other interesting things about high-performing teams is this idea of conflict. And on the outside, looking in at teams that work so well together, it's easy for us to assume that there's no conflict. They just get on really well. But the reality is there's almost always conflict for high-performing teams. The difference is that they have a healthy way of dealing with it and managing and working through the conflict. And teams also high-performing teams see conflict as an opportunity to actually embrace it rather than run away from it. So strengthening relationships, hugely important. Some of the other things to think about, when we have a high level of trust, engagement, communication, collaboration with our colleagues at work, particularly within our teams, some of the consequences from that include work health and safety incidents actually decrease substantially. And this can include some of the psychosocial work health safety incidents that have become commonplace in workplaces. If you think of things like bullying, harassment, often they're triggered by, again, fear, a lack of trust. So when we have trust, when we have stronger relationships with people at work, incidents around work health and safety decrease quite substantially. One of the other things that changes is the relationship between our teams and our customers actually increases and improves. So even though we're working on ourselves and building relationships internally, that actually translates into more engaged customers, and customers tend to be more loyal, they become more advocates for the organisation, and they will be more open to new services, new products, different services, etc., than they may have been in the past. They tend to, they're more loyal. That's probably the quickest way to explain that. One of the other things that happens for organisations, and this is particularly important in the private sector, in the corporate world, where ongoing profitability for a business is vital. If we're not profitable, we disappear. So studies have also found that when our teams become more engaged, when we have better relationships within the teams, when we're more open, we communicate better, business profits also tend to increase. So whilst a lot of this work on the inside looks like it's just about me and the person that I'm sitting next to and understanding them better and learning how to talk to them and understanding how they communicate and why they like talking face to face. I don't like it that much. I prefer emails, but they're not great on emails. As we come to understand all of that and we build a stronger relationship, the impact of that is much broader than just the two of us or just our team. So some of the simple things that we can do to start building stronger relationships with people at work. And the first, again, going back to Patrick Lencioni's model, is all about trust. Lencioni's not the only one who talks about trust. Stephen Covey, who wrote The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, spent most of his career studying leaders and teams in organisations, trying to understand what makes a great leader, what makes a team work better than others. And Covey actually published a paper called the 13 Behaviours of High Trust Leaders, because he also recognised that trust is incredibly important in an organisation and certainly across relationships within the organisation. So start with trust. Sometimes a good idea to sit as a team to perhaps hit the pause button at the end of the day or maybe early in the morning before the real work starts and have a conversation about where is the trust level within our team. You could do this on a one-on-one basis with somebody at work that you need to build a stronger relationship with. Where is our trust at the moment? What can we do to build on that? Another thing that helps build stronger relationships with other people is just to work on our emotional intelligence. EQ has been a big thing in business, in organisations now for 10 or 15 years, probably longer. There have been a number of books, innumerable studies that have been done around EQ and the impact that it has in business. Some of the stats that have come out of EQ, 75% of jobs within organisations are sabotaged or affected by people's inability to deal with their own emotional issues and the emotions of others around them. So to understand yourself better as an emotional creature. And we can all pretend that we're not emotional, but it's not possible for us to not feel emotions. So the more work we do on ourselves to start with, we understand what emotions I'm feeling, what's triggering or driving those emotions. Are those emotions supporting me? Are they actually damaging me or making it harder for me to trust somebody else, to communicate or collaborate with others? Can I choose a different emotional state by thinking differently about a situation? So as I build on my own EQ, that also can then help me to understand the emotional state of others. What triggers emotional reactions for them? If there are certain words or phrases that I use that triggers a reaction, can I, with respect, help them become aware of that? Can I choose to act differently so that I don't trigger that reaction in others? Build EQ, massively important. One of the other things that we can do to build stronger relationships is just to be present. Now, this sounds like a buzzword, and I guess to some extent it is. But when we talk about just being present with somebody else, it is giving them the respect of our complete undivided attention. It's not having a conversation and actually how the delay is turned off. But So just let me check this for a second because it's just buzzed and it might be important. Oh, sorry, the phone's ringing, so I'd love to talk to you about this, but I really need to take the calls out back. I've actually done that in the past and been completely unaware of it, and this is one of the challenges with devices, distractions. In the middle of a conversation with somebody in the phone rang. So first, the problem was I actually had the phone turned on. It wasn't that important. And secondly, I actually took the call. So the message that I was sending to the person that I was having the conversation with was suddenly, you're not that important. This is more important than you. And that's a terrible thing to do to someone without at least first asking, is it okay if it's my daughter on the phone, she's 6 months pregnant, is it okay? Whatever it happens to be. Be present. Let go of devices, turn them off, put them on flight mode, turn away from your computer. Don't have a conversation with someone over the phone whilst you're also banging away on the keyboard. Whether they can hear the sound or not doesn't matter because you can't pay attention consciously to more than one thing at a time. The human brain doesn't work that way. Or if it does, we haven't learned how to use it that way. So our attention is very, very limited. When you're having a conversation with somebody else at work, if building a relationship with them is important, then give them the honour and the courtesy and the respect of your full, complete, undivided attention. Just be present. It's amazing the impact that can have on relationships with other people when you can do that. Some of the other things that can help build stronger relationships include getting into a mindset of collaborating. Well, probably one of the worst things that's been fed to us in organisations, in business, in the last 50 or 60 years is this idea that to get ahead, you have to do it at someone else's expense. Promotion, recruitment, new jobs, pay rises, all about I need to win, and that means somebody else has to lose, but that's just the way it is. So we take that into our teams, and often we have a mindset of competition rather than collaboration. And one of the things that happens to us, particularly in a work context, in a team sense, or when we need to build a strong relationship with somebody else, is that if we go into that relationship with a competitive attitude, it short circuits the trust. It undermines the trust that we may be trying to build, and to some extent it won't enable us to get that relationship to the point where it could be. So think collaboration first. How do I work with others to build stronger relationships, to be more trusting, more collaborative, more communicative, and just to build better teams, and also to become better people. Open communication is another hugely important hallmark in strong relationships. And this in part, again, comes back to trust. If I don't trust you, I'm less likely to be completely open with you. And that's not necessarily oversharing about my personal life. But if I don't fully trust you, if I think you're just out to get ahead at my expense, I'm probably going to withhold information. We talk about organisational silos. And this is a concept that's been around for probably 100 years. And one of the things that creates silos in the first place is an absence of trust. One of the other things that can create silos is competition. If it's you against me, if it's dog eat dog, then I'm going to withhold a certain amount of information because that gives me some leverage over you or some advantage over you. It's a competition thing, so we don't communicate as well as we can. So recognising that sometimes just doing the hard thing and being the bigger person to start with and being more open in how you communicate can change the relationship that you have with others at work. One of the other really simple things that can help build stronger relationships, again, and it just comes back to get to know each other. My wife, Danette, got a job once based on her recommendation for two dysfunctional teams. The managers involved were at their wits' end in terms of how to get these teams to work better. And Danette started just by saying, well, let's just have morning teas. And the only rule with morning teas is that you can't talk work, because the idea about morning teas is the social environment involves food, which is always fun. And the idea is let's just find out more about who we are as human beings, not about what you do in the workplace and what's your role and who's your manager. Who are you as a human being? Get to know the people around you, share a little bit more about yourself. That helps build stronger relationships. One of the other things that you can do is get social, and this is more as an organisation. Organisations, agencies, departments that get involved in social activities outside of work have been shown to have much stronger relationships internally. And one of the reasons this can work is because, again, we have a shared sense of purpose. We also can have a shared sense that we're involved in something that's bigger than just our team, certainly bigger than our organisation. So as a company, as a business, as a department, spending half a day a month volunteering or just getting involved in some social activities. Maybe as a team, getting together a whole bunch of books that have been laying around at home that you haven't read for years, you have no real intention of rereading them again. So as a team, let's get together, bring in a pile of books, put them in a box, take them down to your local Lifeline. They have book fairs 2 or 3 times a year. It's a wonderful way of recycling, generating some revenue for Lifeline and doing some good. And it makes us feel good and it strengthens our relationship because we're in that together. Social activities as an organisation, hugely helpful. Just another quick quote from Henry Ford, a gentleman who understood the power of teams and made a couple of motor vehicles in his day. Coming together is a beginning. New team, new relationship. Keeping together is progress. So if the relationship can continue over time, we are getting better. Working together is success. And it's that productivity thing, which in part again comes back to trust, open communication, collaboration, etc. So here's some of the things that have been shown to make building strong relationships really, really difficult in the workplace. And the first is not recognising people as people. When we see people as resources, and particularly when we use language in our policy procedures, in our speech, about resources, people being resources rather than people, that's a real challenge to building strong relationships. I have a personal issue with talent at the moment, so suddenly we're not people anymore, we're talent. I'm old, got a bow tie on. I still prefer to talk about people as human beings rather than talent. It's not talent management. We don't manage our talent, we manage our people. So recognise people as people, not as resources. If you are inclined to slip into a very much a task-focused mode where you've got a lot of work on and you're really just trying to get through everything, get all the work done, all the boxes ticked, it can lead to starting to think about your team as a resource and how do I get the most out of these resources. Again, think of them as people. Talk about them as people. An absence of strong management and leadership is also often a risk for organisations in terms of building stronger relationships. We often look to, as tribal creatures, we often look to the alpha in our group, in our teams, to decide, one, is it safe? Are things okay? And how should we behave? So strong management, stronger leadership can have a big impact on the ability to build stronger relationships. Something else that can help short circuit or make it harder to strengthen relationships across organisations, across teams, is a lack of a visible, meaningful, relevant career path or growth opportunities. Something else for us to keep in mind is what are we doing to help create that, maintain that career path, growth and development opportunities for our staff. And another aspect which is interesting but is a lack of adequate remuneration. If we pay people peanuts, the old saying, if you pay peanuts, you get monkeys, it's not a particularly nice saying. But where we fail to recognise the monetary value of the work and effort that people are putting in, that can also affect their ability to engage emotionally. So if I feel that I'm not valued and my boss just sees me as a resource, I don't really understand the way they lead and the pay here is terrible, I will turn up, but I won't engage emotionally as much as I could. So I'm not really that invested in building stronger relationships. Recognition is also another one. Fundamentally, human beings like to feel that their presence, their existence is valued in some way. So not being recognised, having no formal recognition of your attendance, your participation, your engagement, your efforts, all of that is a killer when it comes to strengthening relationships. Trust we've talked about a lot. So I might hit the pause button there just for a second and throw this back out to everyone on the call. I'd love to hear from you. So what are some of the other things in your experience that are causing disengagement, where you're either yourself perhaps or some of the people that you work with, you're noticing are really not in the workplace as much as they could, so it's more about attendance rather than engagement? What other things cause disengagement in your workplace? Again, feel free to unmute yourself, or if you want to throw some responses into the chat box, I'd love to hear from you. Okay, thanks for that. So moving on, the last part of the webinar today, I wanted to talk about some specific tools that you can use to build stronger relationships. And the first of these is active listening. Now, we mentioned on the call a little earlier this idea of being present. So we hear through our ears, using our brain, that listening is a whole different thing. It's not just hearing something that's being said by another person, it's giving them our full attention, it's being fully present, it's engaging more of our senses in the conversation. It's giving them cues, so visual cues, if it's a face-to-face conversation, making eye contact, nodding, paraphrasing, even something like, yeah, that sounds terrible, but that's fantastic. Just something, doing something to let them know that you are firstly paying attention, and secondly, that you're trying to understand them, their position, what it is that they're sharing with you. Immensely powerful. Stephen Covey in the 7 Habits, habit number 5 was seek first to understand, then to be understood. So in a one-on-one conversation with somebody else, give them the courtesy, the respect of your complete attention. Listen actively, understand where they're coming from. Because when you do that, they are subconsciously more inclined to give you the same courtesy back. Immensely powerful tool. Active listening. If you find yourself starting to have opinions about things that someone else is saying, just be mindful of that, notice that, and then let go of it. If you are trying to build a relationship at work with someone and your current relationship is quite strained, it's never really been that good, but it is important that you strengthen it. If you have a conversation with that other person, be really mindful before you go into the conversation of any preconceived ideas, stories, biases that you may have about that person. Again, try and go in with an open mind and open heart. Give them the opportunity to speak first. Make a genuine effort to understand them. And that can have a huge impact on how well the relationship can go from there. So active listening, massively important. The second tool I wanted to mention briefly is the WAIT tool. The WAIT in this case is an acronym, and it stands for Why Am I Talking? Because I'm running the webinar. We can often fall into the trap of being in love with the sound of our own voice, or we have information that we feel might be really helpful or it's important for the other person and we want to share it. Or we have a belief that the way they're doing something at the moment, it isn't quite right, it's not as good as it could be, and I know that if I just give them this feedback, everything will be okay and they'll be able to do the job better and things will be perfect. Or I really don't like the way they say that, and it really bugs me. So I'm just going to go and say something to them because if I won't be able to concentrate for the rest of the day. Whatever the story behind that might be, just think about WAIT. Why am I talking? If I to mangle the Pareto principle, the 80-20 rule, perhaps allow the other person to speak 80% of the time and you speak 20% of the time, which means that you're more engaged in active listening. So WAIT. Why am I talking? Just to throw a quick quote in, personal relationships are the fertile soil from which all advancement, all success and all achievement in real life grows. And whilst the quote talks about personal relationships, and you might think, well, hang on, we're actually talking about relationships at work, which are sort of work relationships, except, yeah, they're not. Relationships you build at work are relationships with other people. The other person is a person, you're a person, it's a personal relationship. Yes, it might be in a work context, but it's still personal relationships. Keep that in mind. So tool number 3 in how you build strong relationships is the power of great questions. And this in part comes back or dovetails into the active listening. One of the good things about active listening is that when we ask questions of somebody else to help understand either what they're trying to communicate with us or their point of view or their position, their belief, when we're asking questions, that's giving them a signal that we are genuinely trying to understand them. Perfect. One of the other things that great questions are fantastic for is helping somebody move forward or improve or have an insight. So one of the challenges that we face in the workplace, and we have for probably a century, is in the context of performance management, performance improvement, personal development. How do we get our team, how do we get our staff to work better, to be smarter, to do something differently because we've got new technology available? That means they could do that job in half the time compared to the way they used to do it. So we've had a performance management framework in place for a long, long time that was all about giving people feedback. Now, in some industries, we'll sit down every 6 months and do a performance review. So I'm your boss, I'll send you out a form or a report that gives you an idea of my thinking about how your performance has been in the last 6 months, and here's the areas I think you're doing really well. These are the areas I think you can improve. Here's some suggestions for you to improve, and you can provide your comments, etc. onto that, and that's it. Now, the challenge with that is a lot of the feedback that we provide is given because we believe we have a bias or a belief that giving this person this feedback will help them. They will then think differently about what they're doing. They'll do it differently. They'll turn up for work a little bit earlier. They won't be late all of the time. They'll stay more engaged. They'll get on better with the other teams, whatever it happens to be. The challenge with giving people feedback, and neuroscience has been telling us this now for some time, is that particularly unsolicited feedback, we see it as a threat. So if someone's giving me, constructive criticism, for argument's sake, or constructive feedback, they may be well-meaning, but often my brain interprets it as a personal attack or a threat. And the minute that happens, it triggers a stress response in my brain. So the thinking part of my brain, the part that normally pays attention when I'm having a conversation with somebody else, and I'm trying to understand what they're telling me and I'm trying to think about it, that part of my brain actually starts to shut down. And we see this, if you're a parent, you've ever had a conversation with particularly with a teenager about something that they did, and we think, why did you do that? How could you possibly think that was going to end well? So we start to give them some feedback. Kids would call it a lecture. And you can tell there's a moment at which they basically shut down. So their eyes are still open, they're still nodding, yeah, no, but they're just not engaged at all. And that's because their brain has experienced a threat response. So giving people feedback per se isn't always as effective as asking questions. When we ask somebody a question, rather than saying, look, the way you're doing this at the moment is wrong, it's causing all sorts of problems, you need to do it this way in future, okay, done. So I'm thinking, all right, I've been really clear, I've explained why they need to do it differently, I've told them what they need to do, that should work. And again, what we found in study after study after study is it can work in the short term, but it generally doesn't stick. And the person who's been given the feedback won't hang on to that new way of doing things as well as they could. When we ask questions and then stop talking and give the other person an opportunity to think about, to reflect on the question and come up with their own insights, it changes their brain. So the way their brain is wired actually changes and it becomes theirs, so there's much more ownership, and it's more likely that the behavioural change that we want is going to stick longer term because they've had an insight. So great questions. One of the most critical skills for any coach is the ability to identify and ask great questions. So build more leadership questions. Tool number 4. This is Adam. It's not Adam. It's Adam Grant. Adam is a professor at Wharton Business School. Published a couple of books. He wrote a book, published a book in 2013 called Givers and Takers, and the book is based on a lot of research that Adam had done into, again, organisational behaviour, performance, relationships, trust, engagement, etc. And his model is that there are three types of people in organisations. You're either a giver, a taker, or a matcher. Now, a taker, as the name implies, just takes stuff from anybody. They'll pick your brain for something, but they don't reciprocate. And generally, it's all about competition. And I just give me what you know, because that way I can get ahead, or I can get a pay rise, or I can get more done, or I'll look smarter than you, whatever it happens to be. Matchers are people who will give to others, but they're always looking for literally a win-win situation where I'll give you something, but I need to get something back. So it needs to match. If it doesn't match, I'm not really engaged. And the givers, interestingly, are the people who give because they understand that that's the right thing to do. And so giving can literally just be helping someone else in my team, giving information, giving support, collaborating, giving trust, respect, showing that I'm vulnerable. And what Adam Grant's research found was that the people who give generally are more successful, but so are their teams. And yes, there is a qualifier in all of that, but there are also some people who take giving to an extreme, and at some point, because they don't receive anything back or they don't take anything at all, they burn out. So there needs to be some balance there. But the giver or taker concept is really, really important. So think about, are you a matcher and you're only going to give and help somebody else if there's something in it for you? You know, I'll scratch your back, but you have to scratch mine. Are you a taker? Can you scratch my back for me? Or are you a giver? Do you want a back scratch? Yeah, appropriately. I was just mentioning really quickly another book that Danette and I read recently called Big Potential, written by Sean Acor. And the research that Sean pulls into that book, the underlying theme is that our potential as a human being is amplified massively when we work with other people. So it's not me against you, it's not competition. I actually can achieve so much more if I work with others, if I collaborate. And it's the same with Adam Grant's research around givers. So one of the things you think about to build stronger relationships in the workplace is, how do I give? Am I a giver? Am I a taker? Am I a matcher? And might I want to switch those around a little? Somehow we ended up going backwards. That always works well. Quick question for you. What will you do after today to strengthen your work relationship? So I'd love to hear from anyone on the call at this stage if there's one of the tools or something that's resonated quite strongly for you. What are you going to do? What will you try after today to build stronger relationships at work? I'll give everyone about a minute again. Feel free to unmute yourself or use the chat function, and I'll keep an eye on that. Okay, fantastic. Nearly at the end. We've got, I think, just a couple of minutes left to run. So, again, I will leave the floor open now for final questions from anyone. Feel free to unmute yourself, use the chat function. I will keep an eye on that. I just wanted to mention before we wrap up today, our final webinar in our free monthly series for the year is happening next month on Thursday the 7th of November, same time, 10 a.m. Australian Eastern Standard Time, summertime. And the webinar is on powerful productivity hacks, how to get more done. And we thought that would be a really helpful one leading into the end of the year and looking at how you launch into a spectacular 2020. Well, I hope the webinar has been helpful for you today. As always, if you have questions, afterwards if you'd like more information about some of the tools, techniques, the books, resources that we mentioned during the webinar. Please feel free to reach out. And if you haven't already connected with us online, we'd love to stay in touch with you. We regularly provide a whole bunch of free articles, webinars, videos, infographics, a lot of other information. So if you are social, if you're online socially, please feel free to connect. I'm going to wrap up now. Thanks so much for your time today. It's been great sharing some of this information with you. Have a fantastic Thursday, and I look forward to seeing you on the webinar next month. Bye-bye.